your scientific knowledge also. Veda means knowledge and Anta means ultimate. That is called Vedanta Sutra. So, next. And there's this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that Srila Prabhupada often quoted. Bhaktya Shruta Grihitaya, Bhagavatam 1.2.12. Devotees who are actually serious attain bhakti, scientific devotional service, by hearing Vedic literatures. Bhaktya Shruta Grihitaya is not that one should create something out of sentimentality. Next. So, Srila Prabhupada is the Diksha or Siksha Guru of everyone in ISKCON or who's following his teachings. Next. And he understood the important place that science, the important role that science plays in modern society. Next. And his teachings about this topic of science have a kind of a positive side and a negative side. On the positive side, next, we note that he dedicated his first published book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, to the scientists of the world. So he dedicated the book to them. Next. And he said in a lecture in Montreal in 1968, if you want to understand this Krishna consciousness on the basis of philosophy, logic, and science, we are prepared to present to you. So he wanted the devotees, his followers, to not just be sentimentalists, but be able to present the truths of Krishna consciousness with logic, reason, and science. Next. He said also in this regard, religion without philosophical basis, without scientific basis is sentiment. That religion based on philosophy and science, that is right. Next. So we have to know something about the Vedic epistemology to appreciate these things. Epistemology means how do we get knowledge? It's the branch of philosophy that deals with that. So according to the Vedic epistemology, there's the Aroha Panta, the ascending path, and the Avaroha Panta, descending path. Next. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada said, Aroha Panta means inductive process, to know from here, from the lower status to the higher status, speculative method or ascending process. And Avaroha Panta is the deductive process, getting knowledge from higher authorities. So our Vedic understanding is to receive knowledge from the authorities. That is perfect knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam lecture, June 8th, 1969. Next. So the ascending path of knowledge, which is followed by modern science, relies on two things: the pratyaksha pramana, sense perception, and the anumana pramana, logical inference. In other words, scientists look at the world, they make observations of sense objects, and they say, because this is like this, then it must be like that. They make some logical inference. Next. Now the problem with the ascending method is the senses are imperfect and the mind is imperfect. So when scientists start dealing with things that are beyond the range of their immediate senses, beyond what they can actually demonstrate physically in laboratories and things like that, when they get into questions like the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, they're on very shaky ground. So fortunately, there's another path of knowledge, the Shabda Praman, the descending path of knowledge, which means instead of trying to figure everything out with our mind and senses, we accept that there is a higher authority, there is a conscious, intelligent being who's the source of everything and the controller of everything, has perfect knowledge and is capable of communicating it to human society. Next. So those teachings, which originally exist in the form of transcendental sound vibration, have been, in this yuga, committed to writing. So those are the Vedic literatures, among which are the Puranas, like the Bhagavad Purana or Srimad Bhagavatam, which contain lots of scientific information. Next. But these shastras, the Shabda Pramana, the Vedic literatures, have to be understood in a certain way. They have to be understood according to the direct meaning of the words, not by some indirect method or speculative method. Srila Prabhupada said in this regard, for example, one politician has said that Kurukshetra refers to the body, but in the dictionary there is no such definition. Therefore, this imaginary meaning is Gaunavritti. That means indirect meaning. Whereas the direct meaning is found in the dictionary is the Mukhya Vritti, or the direct meaning. Next. So we look at the Vedic literatures, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Next. Now, we don't ignore pratyaksha and anumana. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, if knowledge acquired through the evidences of pratyaksha, anumana, etc., correspond with the perfect teachings of the Vedas, then of course we are duty-bound to accept such evidences. So this is the basis of the scientific work that's being done by Bhaktivedanta Institute and other devotee groups. We use logic and evidence that is consistent with the conclusions of the Shabda Pramana to draw people's attention to the descending path of knowledge as a valid form of knowledge. Next. Okay, that's not for my presentation. Although I'm glad Narada Muni has appeared.
Go back on. Is it still mirrored over there?
No, it's not mirrored anymore.
Do it again. Yeah, it's good now.
Okay.
So these are some of the devotees, Swarup Damodar, Sadhuputta, Brahmatirtha, a couple of others who were the original members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And they held a conference on Life Comes from Life that Srila Prabhupada very much appreciated. Next. And he said, Srila Prabhupada said, if these boys, in their scientific language, they try to convince, that will be more effective. We, in other words, Srila Prabhupada and other devotees, we are generally speaking that water has come from Krishna, the earth has come from Krishna. That may be blind, but if it is scientifically presented how it has come from Krishna, then they cannot refute so easily. So that was the task that Srila Prabhupada gave to his followers with academic and scientific training, that they should try to put things in such terms that scientists could understand and appreciate. And so they wouldn't be able to express so many doubts and disagreements so easily. Next. This is from Srila Prabhupada's purport to a very famous verse, 1.5.22 from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Scientific knowledge engaged in the service of the Lord and all similar activities are all factually Hari Kirtan, or glorification of the Lord. Next. So that's sort of on the positive side of things. But he also would express himself very clearly in another way. Next. For example, in this morning walk conversation in Los Angeles in 1975, he said, Darwin is a rascal. What is his theory? We kick on your face. That's all. That is our philosophy. The more we kick on Darwin's face, the more advanced in spiritual consciousness. Next. And he asked his devotees not to be mild about this. He says, so you protest, write in book. You are scientists, write in book, prove scientifically. That will be the laurel, be your laurel of taking the doctorate degree. If you also become one of these rascal doctors of philosophy, then what is the use of your Krishna consciousness that whatever they say you silently accept? Challenge these rascals, stop their rascal theories. Next. Similarly, he wrote, the rascal Darwin's theory, so we have to challenge, protest, defeat. That will be our work. Our worshiping of Krishna, that is our internal affair. The external affair, we need to establish this theory. He meant that life comes from life, not from matter. Next. And why did Srila Prabhupada speak like that, speak so strongly on this point? He explained in a room conversation in Bombay in 1977, if we also become enamored by the so-called scientists, politicians, philosophers, then we cannot preach. We must definitely be convinced that they're all rascals. As a gentleman, I can give him some respect. I can talk in a nice way, gentlemanly. That is another thing. That is courtesy. But I know that these rascals, number one, fools, they have no idea. In other words, Srila Prabhupada himself, for the most part, and his disciples, he didn't mean that they should actually, be ungentlemanly or unpolite. But on the serious point of the questions that are involved, we should be uncompromising. So it doesn't mean that if I go to a scientific conference, I have to call everybody a rascal. But I should say something that would get them to think about changing their ideas. And he says, as a gentleman, you give respect, you talk in a nice way, but make your point somehow or other. Next. So I would say Srila Prabhupada was concerned with four main issues in his thoughts about science. Next. The first thing that he emphasized most was life comes from life, not matter. He said, first of all, you have to establish that life is not from matter. Matter is from life. Then they will be under your control. Next. The next issue is consciousness is not produced by matter. He said, they say that consciousness is generated by the combination of matter. Up till now, no scientist has proved that by a combination of chemicals and matter, physical things, one can produce consciousness. Next. The third issue is evolution. We already heard a couple of things he said about Darwin's theory. But there is a kind of spiritual evolution. Srila Prabhupada said in this Bhagavad Gita talk in Calcutta in 1972, the soul is going from one body to another, not that the body is transforming. The Darwin's theory is that the body is transforming. No, body cannot transform. Body can take the shape according to the desire of the soul or according to the effects, resultant actions of one's karma. Next. And then the fourth topic that he was very much concerned about was the origin and structure of the universe. And he said in New Zealand in 1976 in a letter that he wrote to Swarup Damodar, now our PhDs must collaborate and study the fifth canto to make a model for building the Vedic planetarium. Next. So, how did I get into this? Next. I was part of in the 1960s, I was part of American regular culture, Cold War culture. I was in the university studying, preparing for a career in the diplomatic service or one of the intelligence services, like CIA or something. Next. But then I became part of the counterculture. Next. And that didn't satisfy me either. So in 1976, Srila Prabhupada accepted me as his disciple. Next. So part of Bhakti Yoga is one has to use one's talents and abilities in Krishna's service. So I always was very much attached to writing. So I was engaged in service of doing writing for Back to Godhead magazine, and there were a group of us headed by Mukunda Maharaj who produced the books Chant Be Happy, Higher Taste, Coming Back. So that was in the period between 1976 and 1984. Next. In 1984, the BBT trustees asked me to work with Sadhaputa Prabhu, Dr. Richard L. Thompson, to produce a publication called Origins. Next. And that publication gave our basic position on different scientific questions. And then we decided to turn each part of the magazine into a book. And I was given the archaeology topic to work on next. So I spent 8 years doing the research and writing of the book Forbidden Archaeology. Next. So I regard that effort as part of my practice of bhakti yoga. Just like Arjuna, he was a warrior, so he had to engage that under Krishna's direction. And it's a big part of our devotional practice. So I take it as part of my practice of bhakti yoga, my meditation on Krishna. Next. So when I'm in situations like the one depicted here, which is Google headquarters in Mountain View, California, I remember this statement from Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada's purports: scientific knowledge engaged in the service of the Lord and all similar activities are factually Hari Kirtan, or glorification of the Lord. Next. So, really what I'm trying to do is simply excavate the love for Krishna that's buried in my heart under layers of material contamination. So, next. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this presentation. Hare Krishna. So, want to leave the remainder of the time for your questions. Or comments.
Hare Krishna. So, Prabhu, again, thank you for visiting Krishna Life and giving us an opportunity to ask these questions and hearing about scientific preaching in Krishna's service. I have a long list of questions, actually, about like 6, 7 of them. So I'll probably ask a few and then see if others have, and then if they don't, I'll continue asking some questions. My first question is, so the purpose of scientific, or this preaching of Krishna consciousness, presenting it scientifically, using pratyaksha and anumana that is in line with shabda. The purpose is to help people come to Krishna consciousness. But the scientific community, they're very opposed to anything that is what we call a shabda praman, means anything that's scriptural. Oh, this is said in scripture, and immediately they get turned off. What is the scripture? And so, and also Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, and spiritual subject matters are beyond the purview of pratyaksha and anumana. So how can we use pratyaksha and anumana to establish faith in shabda when someone is intrinsically opposed to shabda and attached to pratyaksha and anumana?
Well, one thing is to point out that they have their own system of shabda, hearing from authorities. For example, they talk about their peer-reviewed scientific publications. It's not that every scientist, when he reads a publication of another scientist, goes to his lab and immediately tries to reproduce the experiment. They trust him. He's an authority. They accept a descending path of knowledge if they are really honest about it. So then it becomes a question of discussing the different kinds of descending paths of knowledge. What would an ideal one be like? Whose system of descending knowledge is best matching that ideal? You know, is it scientific publications that are later exposed to contain cheating and have to be withdrawn from huge scientific publications like Nature? Or is it these other truths? So it's not that just we follow a descending path of knowledge, they also do. Now, another thing to understand is that that person who said what you're saying, we don't accept any descending path of knowledge, well, that's not completely true, because really they do. But even in terms of the conclusions that they reach, if they're honest about it, they will admit that what is being presented is the views of a group of recognized experts using their best current theories, their best qualified people as they consider it, their best evidence that they're able to accumulate, and they'll say this is not some absolute truth. It can change, it will change on the basis of, say, so there are a lot of things that can be done. And the only reason that I have for doing this, I didn't invent this idea of doing this. It's an instruction that has come down through the disciplic succession. Like I said, I'm a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He wanted this done. My interest when I joined Krishna consciousness was to serve Krishna by writing. And I really liked, working on those books, coming back, about the science of reincarnation and chant and be happy, chanting Hare Krishna. I mean, our basic philosophy. I didn't have any plan to do what I eventually got into. Mm-hmm. That just came about, as part of that desire. But that was expressed by Srila Prabhupada. He wanted some of his disciples to confront these issues and deal with them.
How do you, what answer do we have to the argument that the scientific community makes when we tell them that you do not have perfect knowledge? Prabhupada would make this argument that your theories are constantly changing. But this is something they're actually proud of. They feel that, yes, we do not claim that our theories are perfect, and there will be improvement, there will be revision, and this is a good thing. Where Srila Prabhupada spoke of it as being imperfect, and therefore we should take information from Shastra. They seem to be proud of this. How do we answer that argument?
Well, in our path of knowledge also there's humility. There's, like even Lord Brahma, the most intelligent, he says he can't comprehend everything. So we're also in the same position as in saying that we can always improve our understanding. I think I mentioned yesterday a couple of instances of that, you know, like yata shrutam yata mati. You know, we're trying to explain things, you know, carry out this order to try to explain these things and come to a proper understanding based on whatever intelligence Krishna has given us and what we've heard through disciplic succession and from the Vedic literature. So we're also, you could say, humble students of the universe, of the truth. You know, like, you know, it's, you know, something, I think Jiva Goswami wrote in one of his Sandarbhas, I think it was Jiva Goswami, said, I hope, I trust I haven't made any mistake or anything. So the transcendental scientists like Krishnadas Kaviraj, you know, if you look at their writings, there are many expressions of humility, you know, of not being able to access the whole of the absolute truth, but just hoping to get a drop, a taste of the drop of the nectar of devotion. So we can have, like Lord Chaitanya, when he was discussing with Prakashananda Saraswati and the Mayavadi sannyasis in Varanasi, he took a humble position, you know, like, and then, you know, when asked why he was chanting and dancing instead of studying Vedanta Sutra, he said, oh, my guru told me I can't comprehend these things. Of course, he went on to explain Vedanta Sutra in a way that converted the sannyasis. So, we can also take a humble position and not say, okay, we or I understand everything, and you know, we have to carefully understand the meaning of Shastra, and yeah, and it gets back to the point I was mentioning before. They have the same type of problem that they're accusing others of. You know, they say, oh, you're just relying on blind faith and a statement of Shastra. You know, like, they're relying on blind faith in their current expertise and their previous acharyas. Next. And I'm just giving my point of view here. Go ahead.
Thank you for the wonderful exposition. I heard you initially in 2004 when you came to Seattle and gave a presentation to some of the Microsoft employees.
Oh, you were there?
Yeah, a long time ago. I used to work there myself. So my question is related to what Vishnuchitta Prabhu asked, but at a more fundamental level. I was talking to Somaka Prabhu, who is in the back. He works at a University of Illinois, Michigan, and he's both a teacher of art as well as administrator for an MBA program there. It looks like the predominant theme is either atheism or inclination towards Islam in the scientific community. Like they present atheistic ideas and Islamic ideas more so than Vedic ideas. And that's historical, right? I mean, there's been a lot of funding to drive that kind of an activity in the academia today, whether it's Harvard, Yale, and we are laggards to the game. So any thoughts on how we can influence the society, although we are way behind the curve?
Well, it's not just a question for me, it's a question for our whole movement. But, and as I've said quite a few times, our efforts in this area are much like our efforts in all areas in which we're trying to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. We haven't conquered the world yet, but we've done something. We've done something to introduce aspects of Krishna consciousness, whether it's prasadam or some other aspect of it, like our intellectual program. So that's going on. And there are things going on in the Krishna consciousness movement that go way beyond my efforts. Just like, say, many people in the world of Krishna consciousness, they're now becoming aware of the book distribution that's going on here. It was something they may not have been aware of, but now they're becoming aware. So there are things going on in our movement. We have, as you see, I've been around for a long time. I started doing this kind of service in the 1980s, and there's the 1990s, 2000s, 2010, 2020, decades have gone by. And the situation now is different than the situation when I began doing service in this area. At that time, there were maybe a handful of devotees who were involved in this type of effort. And it was very much, practically they were all outsiders in the sense they had no positions within the academic or scientific world, even though they may have had PhDs. They would have PhDs, but they wouldn't be working at a university or some scientific institute. So now there are literally hundreds of devotees with scientific degrees in the sciences, and they're becoming attracted to the Krishna consciousness movement and to different branches of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, like the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies in Gainesville, Florida, has attracted dozens and dozens of very well qualified devotee scientists, astrophysicists, cognitive scientists, others. And, they're putting together a very sophisticated approach to things. I mean, myself as an outsider, my approach is one way. But if one is actually, and I can say anything I want, nobody can hold anything over me. I can speak whatever I like, but if someone has, in addition to the knowledge, some position of influence, some position within, the scientific and academic world, then they can be even more influential. And I think that's happening now. For example, there was a conference on consciousness studies held recently, and a team of devotee scientists who have been working in cognitive studies, consciousness studies. They've been doing their own research in past life memories, the effects of Hare Krishna mantra meditation from the medical and psychological point of view, and they were regular participants at the conference. It's a more influential position. So there are, somehow or other, over the decades, maybe one or two names have become, identified with science and Krishna consciousness. But there are now many devotees whose names you wouldn't know, who are doing very wonderful things in this area. So I think that will gradually become known. Yes? Oh, okay.
I have a question for you that came up after your class yesterday. You were talking about Mahavishnu when he sleeps, when he inhales, all the universes expand, and when he exhales, then the universes come back in, right? While he's sleeping. So, if that happens over and over again while he's sleeping, what happens when he wakes up?
Well, his sleeping and our sleeping are a little different. It's called a state of yoga nidra. He's dreaming. He's an expansion of Krishna for a specific purpose. Krishna is always awake, playing with his eternal associates in the spiritual world. Mahavishnu is there to perform a certain function, to manifest the material elements and make arrangements for their training, you could say, to get them qualified to be where they really belong as part of his eternal pastimes. So it's kind of a different sort of purpose. I don't have an exact Shastric statement that I can give to verify that, but sometimes he does. I think when Krishna and Arjuna go through the layers of the universe into the spiritual sky and visit, I think it's Mahavishnu, right? They interact, they talk. Krishna's unlimited. He can have one manifestation in Yoga Nidra, another one, an expansion of that expansion, talking to Krishna and Arjuna. In the rasa dance, he expands into thousands of different forms to relate with each gopi. Or in Dwarka, he expands himself into 16,000 forms to be with each of his wives. So it's a little different, but for this purpose of manifesting the universes, it's stated that he is in that state of yoga nidra, which is maybe something like what some people call lucid dreaming. You know, that term is used, like Srila Prabhupada said, that the whole material cosmos is like a dream of Mahavishnu. So, anything else on that? Oh, up here.
Prabhu, you don't seem to hear so much about scientists creating life from chemicals, at least not in popular culture. I don't know what they're saying in scientific circles. But the big mania now is we're going to create human-like intelligence, even human-like consciousness through a sophisticated computer algorithm under the rubric of artificial intelligence. Could you comment on that?
Well, they've been saying that for decades.
It's a popular trope in science fiction. It has been for years and years and years.
The problem is consciousness is something completely different than a computer algorithm. You know, it's just faith, you know, that someday we're going to get it. Like at the place where scientists very much involved in these things make predictions like that, are these conferences on consciousness studies. And I was at one of them a couple of decades ago, 25 years ago, where one of the scientists, his name was Robert Koch, he had this idea that you were just expressing, that, you know, they're going to figure it out, you know, how to make a network, you know, that would produce consciousness or be conscious. And, you know, 25 years later, he admits we haven't done it, and we're no closer to having done it than we were 25 years ago. And actually, one of the scientists said, you know, we have millions of conscious experiences every day. I mean, the taste of water, the sound of the Hare Krishna mantra, the smell of the incense. I mean, we have just, all of us together, we have just millions and millions of conscious, aware instances. And he said, how many of those millions and trillions of instances of conscious experience have we been able to explain? Said 0. So that's kind of the current state of affairs. Now, one thing that some of them have tried to do is to say that, well, matter has the property of consciousness on the atomic level. In other words, they're starting to see that their monistic idea that everything comes from matter, only matter exists, and everything else is a byproduct of that. That's one kind of monism. Now they have what they call dual aspect monism, where they say that consciousness is not produced in matter, it's just another aspect of matter. It's a property of matter. But we don't observe, like each person sitting here in this temple room is a conscious, intelligent, personal being. And each of us has our consciousness. It extends a certain range. And we don't see our consciousness as a collection of little atomic consciousnesses swarming together. We experience, no, I'm an individual subject, and I'm aware in a holistic way of all the different sensory inputs I have and all the different ways I can interact with the sense objects around me through my working senses. So that, I think that idea that consciousness is there on the atomic level doesn't really solve the problem of how do you get a unique, individual, personal, subjective experience that's holistic, not broken into kind of like an atomic swarm of little bits of consciousness.
It seems like it's all just a cope to somehow or another we have to explain that there's no God. That's their bedrock premise.
Yeah, it's, I think it's, they made a decision that, if you look at science as it existed, say, 500 years ago in Europe, scientists were dealing with mystic powers, subtle energies, vital forces, and things like that. It was a very different thing. But then they decided to focus on ordinary matter, not subtle forms of matter and things like that. And it was very productive for them in the sense that by focusing on ordinary matter, they were able to develop technologies like make better weapons, make pharmaceuticals, make all kinds of things that people liked, governments liked, corporations liked. And it was very successful for them, but it came at a price that they lost a complete picture of reality. There are huge areas of human experience that they just have to say now are just not true. Or, so it was successful, but at a cost. Like we have all this technology, these medicines, weapons of mass destruction, artificial intelligence, and everything else. But we've lost our identity, because they not only tried just to focus on matter, but they said everything else comes from matter. And therefore we have the kind of world that we live in today, not able to solve the real problems of life, birth, death, old age, and disease, and not able to explain things like consciousness, the origin of life, the origin of the universe. So, next.
Thank you for enlightening talks both today and yesterday. From a Vedic perspective, how do you define life, and what conceptually disambiguates it from consciousness?
From the Vedic perspective, how do we define life?
And what distinguishes it from consciousness?
I would define it as a combination of a soul and a material body. That's how Krishna defines it in Bhagavad Gita. So any creature that we observe is a combination of a soul and a certain configuration of material elements arranged for its body. So when we say life comes from life, we're talking about basically the soul, the Atma, the conscious individual self. That's what a living thing is. And according to its desire, it gets gross and subtle material bodies through which it expresses itself. So that's what any living thing is. Whether it's a blade of grass or a bird or an insect or a fish or a dog or a cow or an elephant or a human being, any life form is a combination of those energies. That's how I would answer the question.
So, Vedic cosmology, there's certain aspects of it. Srila Prabhupada wanted us to present, as you just showed us in the slide, the Vedic cosmological model. There are things that, for instance, like the four elephants that are holding up the Bhumandala, things that the scientific community would outright reject as being cartoonish or illogical and unscientific. So how will presenting Vedic cosmology actually help us in scientific preaching when there are things like this?
I get back to what the Srimad Bhagavatam is presenting in the 5th canto, which is a description of a universal form. And the advantages of the universal form, of contemplating and hearing about the universal form for anyone, is that if they do that, they will be situated in the mode of goodness, which will allow them to make further advancement. And for those who present the idea with the motive of increasing Bhagavad Dharma, their own Krishna consciousness will increase. So sometimes it's called the first step in God realization. Mm-hmm. Now, how to present this in a persuasive way to the scientific world is an interesting question. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would say, well, we don't care so much about the scientists, we care about the people who are being misled by them. So that's something to consider. But I think there are possibilities for introducing these ideas. I mean, we have to do it. I mean, those of us who are, disciples of Srila Prabhupada, either Shiksha or Diksha, which includes practically everyone, is, he had a desire that this be done, and to me, it's beneficial to do it. But how to do it, even the cosmologists today, they're presenting things that are just astonishing. 65% of the universe, the cosmos being dark energy, that you have dark matter arranged in all kinds of structures. They talk about, the structures of galaxies and things that they think are related to dark matter, and they're configured in different ways. They call them walls or something, that they see in their work. They infer the existence of vast structures, vast invisible structures. I mean, so I guess it all depends upon whose invisible structures are the best, So, and there are, say, like, you had Sadhaputta Prabhu, who wrote a book called Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. I think we're still exploring how to do this. Different devotees working in different parts of the world in different ways are exploring, options for how best to present these things. But one thing he did, we're talking about the ring islands and oceans of Bhumandala. So he was pointing out that there's a correspondence between, if you plot the geocentric orbits of the planets, like you put the Earth in the center and you show the orbit of a planet, basically it's epicycles, the path that a planet follows from the perspective of the Earth, which is where we are. It doesn't move in a straight line like a circle. It goes, like this. And he pointed out there's a correspondence between, say, if you make a circle on the inner boundary, like you have this donut, like going like this. If you draw a circle around the outer boundary and the inner part of the donut, those circles correspond to the islands of and oceans of Bhumandala. So, I mean, to get into the very specific details of how it's possible to present something that is apparently never going to be visible to anyone, and have it be given some consideration in terms of what can be observed. I mean, that's a particular example. But I would say for the devotee audience, basically we can always be assured that nobody has shown that life can come from chemicals. Nobody has shown that consciousness can come from matter. Nobody has shown how you can possibly have evolution of new body plans. I mean, they'll say it happened by evolution, and they'll say a few things about it, but there's no general explanation. And how to get into the details of all of that, that's kind of a specialized service.
At this one university in Kansas City, there was this professor who came and he took a Bhagavad Gita. He said he was really interested in it. He was a PhD in physics and also in astronomy. And I think he had some like position in the Department of Defense or something that's on their website. My spiritual master, His Holiness Dhanavir Goswami, wanted to preach to him, and somehow or other, when I was speaking with that professor, he gave us like a key to the rooms in his department, like the different physics classrooms, and he would let us set up like a club there at the school and use his rooms to like for preaching and kirtan and prasadam. So we had a few times of trying to, that professor, he came and he met with Maharaj, who spoke with him, it was pretty brief, and Maharaj was trying to speak with him again, and this professor, he kept kind of delaying coming back to the temple. So I wanted to try to kind of like, I guess, prod him a bit into coming to the temple more. So we started trying to I was trying to speak to him and preach with him a little bit. So I was asking him like what's the current theory for where all the universe comes from? And he was explaining it, showing me like these posters of the Big Bang Theory. And we just had a few conversations with him. So I was wondering, what I was wondering is how we can, I guess someone in my position who's like a neophyte and very inexperienced, what we can do to preach to people like this, like these scientists.
Well, there are many aspects of our movement that need further development. And, ideally, the Bhaktivedanta Institute should be doing its own work with scientists and academics. And, in our society, actually seem to have done a pretty good job with, Sanskrit studies and Indology. There are lots of people involved in that. But in the scientific questions, it's not as developed. But ideally, what should be happening is that the Bhaktivedanta Institute should be working on different levels. On one level, dealing with scientists directly as other scientists or academics, and discussing these things and producing publications about them. But then for the devotee community who may not be trained scientists but need to preach or do other kinds of outreach to them, there should be courses and facilities and publications that are good for that purpose. That was the purpose of the Origins magazine. This goes back to 1984. That's when that was published, probably before a lot of you were born. But that was an attempt to have a devotee scientist, namely Sadhguru Prabhu, who had a PhD in mathematics from Cornell University, but who was very interested in all of the scientific questions. We made that publication basically for students and other intelligent people, to give them some basic idea of what our position is on different scientific questions. So I think that's still in print, but that was designed for that purpose, for a purpose like you're talking about. Well, here's something, you could give to a scientist who it would be in language that he could understand and appreciate, whereas maybe just one of our other books, it's more in theological terms or philosophical terms, not scientifically, and then he could look at that, and maybe something there would pique his interest. In the month of July, I think the 13th and 14th and the 20th and 21st, the Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies in Gainesville is going to put on a summer school, be an online summer school where there will be different devotee scientists speaking about their topics in a way that's suitable for a general audience and also for any professor or science student that you would meet. So it's it's an ongoing effort, like so many of our projects in Krishna consciousness. It's not at the end state, still developing. But the point you raise is a good one. There should be, we should be thinking, and we have been thinking, how to present these things within the scientific and academic world, and then through our centers to, devotees do college preaching programs, or they may have in their congregation, like you said, some acquaintance, a professor or doctor of one of the sciences that could be interested in these things. And we actually see that they are. We have hundreds of scientists and academics joining this movement all over the world. It's people with advanced degrees in the sciences. So it is working. You can't say it doesn't work. Because they're joining. So it is possible. Of course, everyone has their free will. Even Krishna doesn't force anybody. Okay. Oh, there's somebody way in the back, too. Way in the back. Oh, is there any hands up among the ladies?
Hare Krishna. Is it on? Hello? Is that on? Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for this enlightening talk. This is actually something that I ponder about relatively often, specifically how can we infuse Krishna consciousness in our academic and professional life. So thank you for touching upon this subject, and I'd like to ask you something that might be a little bit vague and at the same time specific, to see if you could give some tangible examples, some practical examples of how this might play out, of how do you think we can do exactly that, just that, infusing Krishna consciousness in the practice of, for instance, being a doctor. How can you serve your patients in such a way that your Krishna consciousness transpires? I think that there's a very obvious ways in which it manifests, but I wonder if there are practical ways to do so.
Okay. Can you help me
Thank you.
understand the question?
She's asking how can we infuse, transpire Krishna consciousness in professions like being a doctor. In the academic and professional fields, and one of the examples she was asking about specifically in regards to being a doctor.
Okay. There are several members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute who are working doctors, either in hospitals or universities in North America or India or Europe. And to make advancement in Krishna consciousness, any aspect of it requires the association of devotees. So the Bhaktivedanta Institute and other groups, like there's a group in Delhi on science and spirituality, these are associations of professionals who happen to be devotees, but they're involved in science or medicine. And they meet together, they have meetings, conferences, and they also began research projects. Like some of them are involved in doing research in past life memories in India. You know, they're doing that. There are doctors working in hospitals who have done studies on the effects of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra on different physiological and psychological conditions. You know, so I would encourage anyone who's interested to get in touch with one of those groups and become part of their sangha. Because it may seem difficult if you're just on your own somewhere, you know, working. You know, you require the association of other devotees with similar interests and similar training. And you know, they discuss among themselves. I've participated in some of these discussions where they'll do a reading of a text, or they'll be discussing a research project, or how to organize a conference where these ideas can be expressed. So there are a lot of practical things that someone could do if they are in a position, if they are interested in Krishna consciousness and they are trained in one of the scientific or medical disciplines, and they have some desire to do something with that. I think the best way is just to start associating with some of these groups. And see what's already being practically done, and what you could contribute to it, how you could contribute to it, or maybe you have some new idea that you could convince others to participate in.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for wonderful talks. Speaking with one of my collaborators, is a neuroscientist. He had a little symposium on addiction, and it's curious to see how everyone in this symposium trying to explain everything from a biochemical, electrochemical perspective. And anyway, at the end, I end up speaking to him. And we turn to topics like consciousness, the soul, and we touch upon God. And he's like, how can God exist if all this world, so many bad things happen? So how would you address this question from a scientific point of view to someone that doesn't have the basis, right? Like understanding karma, understanding the soul. How would you address this question? Thank you.
If I understand your question correctly, the way that Srila Prabhupada advised is that the first step should be to demonstrate the existence of the subtle material body of mind, intelligence, ego, and show, then from there, everything else can follow. So the work that's going on in the circles that I'm familiar with are first aiming at that. And, for example, I mentioned past life memories. If a person really can be shown to have an accurate memory of a past life, that means there has to be some means of transmission between one body and another. And since we're in the material world, it means there must be some material elements involved. So there may be the need to do the same thing that physicists, astrophysicists, and astronomers had to do. Originally, they had the idea in astronomy and astrophysics that the entire universe is made of the ordinary chemical elements, the ones in the periodic table of elements. And they were trying to figure out everything in terms of that, but they found they couldn't explain the spiral structure of galaxies. Sometimes maybe you've seen, pictures of galaxies like little pinwheels with different arms going out. If, in terms of ordinary matter, the arms should have been way out, of the pinwheel, but they were kind of tightly circled around the center object. So they said, okay, how are we going to explain this? We can't explain it in terms of the chemical elements operating according to known gravitational laws. So they proposed, well, there must be some missing mass. There must be much more matter involved in the process than we can perceive with our ordinary instruments. So they proposed dark matter, an invisible type of matter that has, nevertheless, some gravitational effect. So they proposed some unobservable element, some new type of matter. And this is kind of a big development in science, because since the time of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, scientists had been eliminating different things like that. You know, subtle energies, vital forces. They're saying, okay, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of that. But now, in the 20th century, late 20th century and this century, they're starting to add things into the picture of physics. They found that dark matter wasn't enough to explain what they observed. So now they've come up with dark energy, which has, according to them, a force that operates the opposite of gravity. Gravity attracts things, dark energy pushes things out. So I think the same thing is necessary in biology, that in order to explain what we can actually observe, consciousness, different mental phenomena, out-of-body experiences, past life memories, and things like that, we may need to introduce new elements into our picture of biological reality, just like the physicists had to add new elements to enable them to understand what they could actually observe in physics. So that's basically how I see things going on. And there are even, scientists who admit these things, that maybe we're going to have to change our ontology. Ontology means it's a branch of philosophy that deals with what actually exists in the world. So they are trying to build something from a kit that is currently missing some of the pieces that are necessary to come up with a good explanation for these things. So that would be the goal that some of the scientists who are associated with our movement are working on at the present time. And of course, being that they are within the current institutions and they're part of that community, they're trying to operate according to the standards of that community. In other words, scientists are good in the sense that they are disciplined. At least many of them are. But they have an academic rigor or a scientific rigor and discipline, which is actually not a bad thing. So,
Hare Krishna. In your time in devotional service, have you noticed any particular aspect of Vedic science that plants a seed of doubt in a lot of devotees, something that maybe we can be prepared to thoroughly understand and explain? Like, I know the moon, for example, has been a common problem, and some devotees leave because they just can't accept it, kind of thing. Are there any other examples?
Well, traditionally, people have wondered about dinosaurs, people have wondered about the moon landings, people have wondered about other topics as well. Srila Prabhupada said something interesting, about, that for the average person, whether they're a devotee or a non-devotee, they have to accept things on the basis of authority. Like, how are you going to know what's happening out in the universe or on the moon or whatever? For the average person, they can't verify it themselves. The average person can't take a rocket to the moon and look and see what's up there. So he said, your choice is you accept either what the Vedas say or what the scientists say, or accept both of them. There's no way for the average person, even the scientists, to actually verify the claims about what's actually occurred. So that's a question. But say in our group in the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, we've got a whole list of questions that devotees have over the decades raised about these things, like the ones that you mentioned. So we're aware of those concerns, and it is one of our goals to come up with answers. But how to do that is an interesting question, because I think we always want to respect individual freedom of thought and like that, but at the same time, we're individuals practicing Krishna consciousness within one or another institutions. They may be different mats, different sanghas, different things like that. So one approach is to just the devotees who have different ideas, present them and persuade others, whoever if they're concerned about these things, they can investigate what different devotees say and come up with something. Or you can try to make it an institutional thing, which personally I'm not so much in favor of. Srila Prabhupada's books are there. If somebody is presenting something, like a question that comes up is flat earth versus globe. That's something that comes up. I have my approach to that question. It's based on the approach that Sadhuputta Prabhu took in his book, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy, where he proposed that according to one's level of sense perception, one can perceive the same object in different ways, either as a globe or a plane, flat. And his conclusion was that the earth that we inhabit with our level of sense perception is manifesting itself as a globe. But for beings with a higher degree of sense perception, they perceive it in a different way, To me, that's a satisfactory explanation. Srila Prabhupada was once asked about this question, is the earth a plane or a globe? He said both. So that's satisfying to me personally. But I know that others may not be satisfied with that, and they will say it's the earth that we experience is the earth that's on Jambudweep, on the surface of the plain of Bhumandala. But my question then becomes, what about the movements of the sun? If we're on a flat earth that's part of Jambudweep, then the sun, according to the Bhagavatam, is going around in a daily circle on the top of the Manasatara mountain, which is a few hundred yojanas or something above the plain of Bhumandala. So the sun should be going like around. But, I live in California, and sometimes we had Harinam on the beach in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and you're looking due west, and the sun is up in the sky, and it goes down, straight down into the ocean, at sunset. It's not circling around the horizon. So it kind of, if you study the movements of the sun, that's observable to us. Kind of adds up to a globe picture of the earth with our level of sense perception. But that's just me. Somebody else may have a different idea. And it becomes a question. What, you try to impose some answer to the question from some authority group, or you just rely on persuasion?
So, the Himalayas that are described in the Bhagavatam are of a much higher height. I don't know how they're taller than what is described or accepted today by the scientific community. Similarly, Srila Prabhupada, I believe, once said while flying over the Alps that the mountains are taller than what they think them to be, or something like this. How do you understand these statements, and are the Himalayas that we call north of India the Himalayas described in the Bhagavatam?
Well, as I was saying yesterday when I was talking about Vedic cosmology, that according to one's level of perception, one will perceive things in a different way, which may include different scale, a different geometry. So that's something that comes up in the scientific world. There's the world of our ordinary experience, there's the realm of relativity, and then there's the realm of quantum mechanics, where things become very strange, very different from the world that we perceive. with our ordinary sense experience. So that's how I personally relate to these things. If I were on the proper level of sense perception, I would perceive the Himalaya as described in the Bhagavatam, or Mount Meru, for example. But again, one has to understand, this is the way I think about it anyways, is what is the purpose of this information? What is the purpose of the descriptions that are being given? Like, are we imposing our culturally conditioned understandings on the Bhagavatam? Like, we're concerned with distances and whether or not it matches up with what modern science says or something like that. I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm just in terms of discussions I've gotten into over the years that, I find, if you look at the history of science, say about the size of the universe or the age of the universe, you chart it over the years, you can see, they used to think the universe was our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, that's the extent of the universe. And then in the early 20th century, they developed telescopes that could resolve little patches of light they saw in the sky. They called them nebula, clouds. And they determined, okay, we can make out stars. They're actually other galaxies. And then they came up with the idea of looking at the light through a spectroscope from the stars. They could see that the light waves of different elements were shifted towards the red end of the spectrum, which indicated to them that the universe must be expanding. And then they said, okay, it's bigger than we thought. It's bigger than we thought. It's still bigger. It's like a moving target. If we compare, if we're concerned because something that comes from the Shabda Pramana doesn't match up with what today's version is, well, 100 years from now it'll be completely different. Maybe, because a lot depends on the instruments that are available. What if there's some crisis, world climate crisis, and all of our technology just is destroyed, and you don't have your big space telescopes anymore. You don't have your spectrometry machines. You don't have, that's going to change what people think about the universe. And if, like I said, if you come back in 100 years, you're going to find it's a different sort of thing. Maybe it'll be, why are the descriptions of the mountains in Srimad Bhagavatam so small? But so there's a lot of metaphysical and philosophical considerations about why people focus on the things that they do. That's why I like to go to the Bhagavatam itself and see that it's a presentation of a Virat Rupa or universal form, and it has a purpose. But that said, your question is a valid one, and it is on the list of questions that we're going to be considering, and we'll have to see if we can come up with an answer that satisfies you. But for me, the basic position is that ultimately, being involved in Krishna consciousness means understanding I'm not the supreme being. I don't have unlimited consciousness. I can't comprehend everything. There are some things I'm just going to have to hear from authority. And if we could perceive everything correctly with our mind and senses, and that's the standard, if it makes sense to me in terms of what I think with my mind and what I'm able to perceive with my senses, if that's the standard, there wouldn't be any need for Srimad Bhagavatam to present information about these things. You can figure it all out yourself. You can understand what the absolute truth is. And I think, just like Arjuna, he was brought to a crisis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He was trying to understand and comprehend everything, and it just got too much for him. And he had to approach Krishna, not as his buddy, his companion, but as a teacher with knowledge, his guru. Shishyasteyam shadimam tvam prapanam. So that's kind of the underlying issue. And then other things are just, they grow out of that. Oh, we're way over time.
No. Session was supposed to end until 1:30.
Okay.
But if you think it's...
No, I'll sit here if there are more comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. Have you, in your research, found evidence of Vedic culture existing all over the world, going back millions of years? This is a theme that Srila Prabhupada often spoke about, and I wanted to know if you found any scientific evidence that could allude to that or back that.
Well, even in terms of just modern understandings, we can see that the Vedic culture spread widely outside of, the Indian subcontinent. You have the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia, Vedic temples throughout Indonesia, the influence of Vedic culture through either Buddhism or martial arts and things like that choices of foods extending throughout Asia, China, Japan, Korea, you know, and you know, some people have commented on the similarity between the temples made in Central America by the Aztecs and the Mayans and others to South Indian temples, for example. There's interesting artwork. You know, for example, in India, sometimes you see sculptures of a king or a sage in a half lotus position, you know, with one ankle here and the leg going down off a seat, you know. And there are things exactly like that in South America, showing an Aztec king or something on a seat with the left foot up in the half lotus position with the same mudra. So there are things like that. And you can find temples in South America where they have carvings of lotuses and elephants on them. And
In South America?
yeah,
Oh.
you know, Aztecs, Incas, Mayans, things like that. So there are things like that. I mean, it's not my main area of research, but I think there's a lot that could be done. There's a devotee named Sri Nandanandana who's written some books where he mentions some of these things. Stephen Knapp, K-N-A-P-P. Yeah, he's written about these things. I came across a case, it's not scientifically reported. You know, sometimes a lot of discoveries are made by ordinary people, miners and things like that. They may find something interesting in some layer of coal, which is, according to modern science, usually hundreds of millions of years old. So there was one case where a man in West Virginia was putting a big piece of coal into a coal-burning stove, and he broke it. You know, he had to make it smaller, so he was breaking it up. And inside, solidly embedded in the coal, he found a bell. And I looked at the picture of this bell, and he said, you know, there's some kind of winged demon on the handle. It's actually Garuda. Yeah, it looks just like the bell you use for arti here, you know, like, and he found it in coal 300 million years old. Wow. You know, so I was thinking, I mean, that would be the Chakshusha Manvantar period sometime. But, you know, I mean, according to Shastra, I think that's when Nrsingadev was around. You know, but Garuda. So you do find things like that. So it's one of the topics I think is important in archaeology. One thing is the history of our human species, which I've basically been dealing with. Another is the Kali Yuga history of India. Like we say, 5,000 years ago, Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he went to Dwarka, he went to Mathura, he went, according to most historians and scientists today, there wasn't any Vedic culture in India 5,000 years ago. So it's a very controversial topic because it's got political implications. But if we're just interested in, well, what are the actual facts? And I don't think that the truth or the facts should be used against anybody, whatever their religious background is. But if people try to use the truth to attack other people, that's not good. But that's a question that needs to be looked into, to try to show the existence or presence of Vedic culture in India for at least 5,000 years, and of course much further back in time. But that's something. And then the topic you mentioned, the archaeological evidence for the presence of Vedic culture in other parts of the world. It's like we understand that Lord Parasuram drove the Kshatriyas out of Bharat, the Indian subcontinent. So they went all over the world, and Srila Prabhupada has said they mixed with the other people, the native peoples that they found in those areas. So we might not be finding, if we look for more evidence, it may not be the pure Vedic culture, because first of all, the ones that were sent out and who went to other parts of the world weren't the most perfect representatives. And then they also mixed with the Aboriginal peoples that they encountered. So
I'm thinking. Okay, so I think we can end here. It's 1:30.
okay.
Just past 1:30. So again, thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. His Grace Drutakarma Prabhu ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So devotees can head down.